When Samantha said in front of all the guests that I wouldn't last a single year on my own, that I was nothing without this family, something inside of me broke, but not in the way she expected. There were no tears. There was no shouting. There was only a cold clarity, like when ice cracks and you can see the dark water underneath. The guests were laughing. A few were recording on their phones, and I just smiled. That smile must have looked strange to them, because a few of them stopped laughing. I looked my daughter-in-law straight in the eye and said with a calmness I didn't even know I possessed, "Why wait a year? I'm leaving now." The silence that followed was so heavy I could feel it in my bones. I turned around, grabbed my purse from the cream-colored sofa, and walked toward the door without looking back. Every step sounded like a thunderclap in that room, full of people who suddenly didn't know where to look. That night, as I packed my things in the room that had been mine for 3 years, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Michael, my son. When I read it, the air left my lungs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got to that moment, because every humiliation has a beginning, and mine started long before that party. 3 years ago, I was 62. My husband had died over 20 years earlier, when Michael was barely 11. I raised that boy alone, working whatever jobs I could, sacrificing my own dreams so he could go to college, so he could have what I never had. I had studied business administration. I'd worked at a major firm before Michael was born. But when I was widowed, I had to choose between my career and my son. I chose my son. I always would. Michael grew up, became a professional, successful. I was so proud. And then he met Samantha. She appeared in our lives like a storm disguised as a breeze. Pretty, elegant, with that way of speaking that makes people think you know more than you really do. At first, I found her charming. How foolish I was. Michael was dazzled. They were married 6 months after they met. The wedding was in a huge ballroom, with flowers that cost more than $10,000. Samantha insisted on every detail. I paid for part of that wedding with the savings I had put away. I thought I was investing in my son's happiness. After the wedding, Michael asked me to move in with them. "Mom, the house is huge. It doesn't make sense for you to live alone in that tiny apartment. Besides, Samantha and I want you to be close." That's what he told me, with that smile that always melted my heart. I agreed. I sold my apartment, that place where I had raised Michael, where every corner held a memory, and I moved into their new house, a modern build in an exclusive neighborhood, with a yard and a pool. My room was on the ground floor, far from the master bedroom. "So you can have your privacy, Eleanor," Samantha told me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I should have seen it then. I should have noticed how she called me by my first name and not Mom, how her hugs were stiff, how her compliments always had a sharp, hidden barb. "That's a lovely dress, Eleanor, so age-appropriate. Thanks for helping with the cleaning. It's good for you to stay active." Little things that dig in like splinters. The first few months were tolerable. I tried to help without being in the way. I cooked sometimes, kept my space tidy, went for walks so I wouldn't be in the middle of things. But Samantha had a way of making me feel like everything I did was wrong. If I cooked, she'd order takeout. "I don't want you to get tired, Eleanor." If I offered to clean, she'd hire a cleaning service. A woman your age shouldn't be scrubbing floors. Every gesture of help was rejected with a poisonous kindness. And Michael saw nothing, or didn't want to see. When I tried to talk to him, he always had an excuse. "Mom, Samantha is just worried about you. You're overreacting. She adores you." Little by little, I became smaller in that house, more invisible. I ate alone most of the time because they always had plans. I stayed in my room when they had guests, because Samantha said I needed to rest. The house was enormous, luxurious, full of expensive furniture and modern art, but I felt like an intruder in a museum. Then the party started. Samantha loved hosting events. Every month there was a reason. Birthdays, anniversaries, celebrating some achievement of Michael's at his job. The house would fill with young, elegant, loud people. I usually stayed in my room, but sometimes Samantha would insist I come down. "Eleanor, come say hello to our friends." And I would go down, put on my best ivory or dusty rose dress, try to smile, but I always felt the stares. The conversations that would stop when I entered. the muffled giggles. One time I heard one of Samantha's friends whisper, "Poor Michael, having to support his mother at this stage." Samantha laughed. She didn't say a word to defend me. That night I cried in my room, with the pillow against my mouth so no one would hear me. But the next day I got up, dried my tears, and carried on. Because that's what you do when you love your son. You endure. Michael's birthday party was different from the start. Samantha had been planning it for weeks, talking about the guest list, the catering, the decorations. She hired a professional event planner who turned our backyard into something out of a magazine. Hanging lights, tables with champagne-colored linens, floral arrangements that must have cost thousands of dollars. Everything perfect, everything flawless. Samantha was wearing an emerald green dress that fit as if it had been painted onto her body. I put on my pearl gray dress, the most elegant one I had. I did my makeup carefully, fixed my hair. I wanted to look good for my son. I wanted him to be proud of me. How naive I was to think that was possible in Samantha's house. The guests started arriving around 7 o'clock in the evening. Michael's friends, colleagues, important clients, Samantha's family. More than 50 people filled the yard with laughter and conversation. I stayed in the kitchen at first, helping the caterers organize the trays. One of the girls looked at me with pity. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this. We've got it." But I needed something to do with my hands. I needed to feel useful. When I went out to the yard, I looked for Michael. He was by the pool, surrounded by friends, laughing. I approached with a smile. "Happy birthday, my love." I hugged him. He returned the hug, but it was quick, distracted. "Thanks, Mom. Have you eaten anything?" I nodded, even though I hadn't had a bite. I didn't want to be a burden, not on his special day. Samantha was at the center of everything, moving between groups, touching arms, laughing that high, bright laugh that drew all eyes. She was the kind of woman who lights up a room when she enters, but also darkens it for everyone else. I tried to chat with some guests. An older couple, friends of Samantha's family, were polite to me. We talked about the weather, the food, about nothing important. But I noticed them looking over my shoulder, as if searching for an excuse to get away. After a few minutes, they excused themselves. I was left alone by a table, holding a glass of wine I didn't want to drink, feeling like a piece of furniture someone forgot to move. Then I heard my name. It was coming from the group where Samantha was, near the bar. I drifted closer without thinking, believing they were calling me. But they weren't. They were talking about me. Samantha had her phone in her hand, showing something to her friends. "It's unbelievable," she was saying with that sweet voice she used when she wanted to sound compassionate. "Michael is so good to her. He keeps her here, gives her everything, and she doesn't even appreciate how lucky she is." One of her friends, a thin woman with lip fillers, nodded. "It must be so hard for you, Samantha, having to share your space like that." Samantha sighed, and in that sigh was something that chilled my blood. It was fake, completely fake. "I just hope Michael realizes it someday. She can't take care of herself. Without us, without this family, she has nothing. Absolutely nothing." I stood paralyzed behind a group of people, unintentionally hidden. No one had seen me. Samantha continued. "I give her 6 months, maybe a year tops, if Michael ever actually lets her go. She has no savings, no career, no thing but this roof over her head. And we provide that roof." Her friends murmured words of support. One said, "You're a saint for putting up with her." Another added, "I couldn't do it. My house is my sacred space." And Samantha smiled. That smile I had seen 1,000 times but now fully understood. Well, someone has to take care of her. Even if I sometimes feel like I'm raising 2 people instead of just planning my family with Michael, the words hit me like fists. Each one was a lie wrapped in poison. I had savings, not a lot after helping to pay for the wedding and other expenses. But I had something. I had worked my whole life. I had raised a son on my own. I had built a life with my own 2 hands when the world left me widowed and vulnerable. And this woman, this girl who had only come into our lives 3 years ago, was reducing me to nothing in front of strangers. She was turning me into a convenient lie for her narrative. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk over there and confront her in front of everyone. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the fear of ruining Michael's party. Or maybe it was a wiser part of me that knew anything I said would be used against me. I walked away without a sound, moving to the other side of the yard where there were fewer people. I sat on a bench under a tree, trying to breathe, trying to process what I had just heard. My hands were shaking. I looked at the house, that enormous house where I lived but that had never been mine. I looked at the people laughing and drinking, oblivious to the pain unfolding in the dark corners of the party. And I looked at my son, my Michael, the boy I had raised, whom I had loved more than my own life, surrounded by friends who had probably heard the same lies about me. How long had Samantha been doing this? How many times had she painted this picture of me as a burden, as someone pathetic who couldn't survive without charity? The anger began to grow. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was cold, calculating, like ice spreading through my veins. I got up from the bench. I walked back toward the party with my head held high. If Samantha wanted to play this game, if she wanted to make me her favorite victim, then so be it. But she was about to find out that women from my generation didn't survive this long by being weak. We survived by being smart. I spent the next hour watching, really watching, not as the invisible mother-in-law trying not to be in the way, but as someone who had finally opened her eyes. I saw how Samantha touched every guest's arm when she spoke, how she tilted her head with false modesty when they paid her compliments. I saw how she controlled the flow of the party, directing conversations, moving people around like pieces on a chessboard. And I saw how, every time someone mentioned Michael, she made sure to be at the center of that story. We just closed a huge deal. We're thinking of buying a beach property. Our life is so blessed. Our. As if Michael were an extension of her and not his own person. Then it was time for the cake. A 3-tier cake decorated with gold details that must have cost over $500. Samantha called everyone to the center of the yard. The lights dimmed, and someone brought out the cake while we all sang Happy Birthday. Michael was beaming, surrounded by love and attention. Samantha was plastered to his side, her arm wound through his like a vine. When we finished singing, Michael blew out the candles. Everyone clapped, and then Samantha picked up a glass and lightly tapped it with a spoon. The tinkling sound made everyone quiet down. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced with that melodious voice she used for presentations. Everyone looked at her expectantly. She smiled, looking at Michael with adoration. 3 years ago, I met the man of my dreams. And not only did I gain a wonderful husband, but a family too. She paused dramatically. Some guests murmured sweet words. I was standing at the edge of the circle, half hidden behind other people. And part of that family, Samantha continued, and her gaze slid over to me, is Eleanor, Michael's mom. The way she said my name made something in my stomach twist. It didn't sound affectionate. It sounded like she was introducing a problem that needed to be discussed. "Eleanor lives with us," she went on, and now several faces turned toward me. Some with curiosity, others with that uncomfortable pity people reserve for difficult situations. And it has been quite an experience. An adventure, I'd say. Nervous laughter. My heart started to beat faster. What was she doing? Michael was looking at her with a confused smile, not understanding where this was going. Samantha took a sip of her drink. "But lately, I've been thinking, I've wondered what would happen if Eleanor had to fend for herself. You know, if she had to live alone, manage her own expenses, her own life." The yard had gone completely silent. I could feel my face burning, but I couldn't move. It was like being trapped in a nightmare where you scream, but no sound comes out. "And honestly," Samantha said, and now her voice had that tone of fake concern that made her sound generous when she was being cruel, "I doubt she could live on her own for more than a year. Maybe not even that." Some people looked down. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances. But there was a group, Samantha's friends mostly, who smirked. One of them even took out her phone and started recording. "I'm not saying it to be mean," my daughter-in-law continued. "I'm just telling the truth. Eleanor has nothing without this family, without Michael, without us. She has no career, no real resources, no independence. It's just a reality." The silence that followed was brutal. I could hear the buzz of insects in the garden, the water in the pool shifting softly, the distant sound of traffic on the street. and I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Some with pity, others with secondhand embarrassment, some with morbid curiosity, waiting to see how the pathetic old woman who had just been publicly destroyed would react. Michael finally spoke up. "Samantha, honey, I don't think this is the time." But his voice was weak, without conviction. He wasn't defending me. He was trying to smooth over the situation without contradicting his wife. Samantha ignored him. "I'm just saying we should be honest about these things. There's no shame in needing help. Eleanor needs this family, and we've been here for her. That's love, right?" She looked around, seeking validation. Some people nodded slowly, others just stared into their drinks, and I just stood there, in my pearl gray dress, feeling as though I had been stripped naked in front of strangers. 3 years of small humiliations had culminated in this moment, and Samantha had orchestrated it perfectly, at my own son's party, in front of dozens of witnesses who would now have this image of me seared into their minds. The pathetic mother-in-law, the burden, the old woman who couldn't take care of herself. But then, something changed. Maybe it was hearing my own thoughts spoken in Samantha's words. Maybe it was seeing Michael do nothing, letting his wife publicly demolish me. Or maybe it was simply that something inside me got tired of shrinking. I got tired of making myself small. I got tired of apologizing for existing. I got tired of being invisible in my own life. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, out of the shadows where I had been hiding. People parted slightly, creating a path. I walked until I was standing in front of Samantha, just a few feet away. She looked at me in surprise, and for a second, I saw a flash of worry in her eyes. "Good. Let her worry." "You're right, Samantha," I said. My voice came out steady, clear, louder than it had sounded in months. "You're absolutely right." She blinked, confused. This wasn't what she expected. She probably expected tears, a scene, something she could use to paint me as hysterical. "I doubt I could live on my own for a year depending on this family," I continued. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Several phones were recording now. Perfect. Let them record this too. "Because this family," I said, and I looked around the yard at all those curious faces, "is not my family. Not anymore." I looked at Michael. My son, my baby, the boy I had held in my arms, whom I had comforted through nightmares, whom I had raised to be a good man. He was staring at me with his mouth slightly open, not understanding. "Why wait a year?" I asked, and now I smiled. It wasn't a sad or bitter smile. It was a calm smile, filled with a cold clarity I didn't even know I possessed. "I'm leaving now." The entire yard seemed to hold its breath. Samantha let out a nervous laugh. "Eleanor, don't be dramatic. You're misunderstanding." I didn't interrupt her. My voice remained calm, but there was steel in it. "I understand perfectly. And you're right about one thing. It's time for me to find out who I am without you. Thank you for the clarity." I turned around. I didn't run. I didn't flee. I walked with my back straight, my head high, each step measured and deliberate. I could feel the stairs burning into my back. I heard murmurs, the sound of someone saying my name, but I didn't stop. I entered the house through the kitchen door. The caterers moved aside, their faces showing shock and something that might have been respect. I went to my room and closed the door. Only then did my hands start to shake. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the room that had been my world for 3 years. The cream-colored walls, the closet where my modest clothes hung, the small dresser with the photos of Michael when he was a little boy. Photos I had framed, that I had cherished, memories of a time when he was mine, when I was enough for him. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was strangely clear, as if a fog that had been covering me for years had finally lifted. I could hear the party continuing outside, quieter now, the laughter forced, the music. Life went on for all of them. But for me, something had ended, and something else was about to begin. I stood up and pulled my suitcase from the closet. It was old, bought over 15 years ago, but it was still functional. I began to pack methodically. Underwear, blouses, pants, the 2 good dresses I had, my comfortable shoes, my toiletries. I didn't have much. I'd never had much, but what I had was mine, earned with my work, with my effort. As I was folding a peach-colored blouse, I heard footsteps in the hall. Someone knocked softly on the door. Mom. It was Michael. Of course it was Michael. My heart squeezed painfully in my chest. For a moment, I considered not opening it, considered leaving him out there, wondering, feeling even a fraction of the abandonment I had felt all night. But I couldn't. He was still my son. He still carried my blood. I opened the door. He was standing there in his wrinkled white shirt, his hair disheveled, his eyes worried. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't do this. As if I were the one creating the problem. As if I were the one who had publicly humiliated someone. What exactly shouldn't I be doing, Michael? I asked. My voice sounded tired even to my own ears. He walked into the room without an invitation, saw the open suitcase on the bed. Panic crossed his face. You can't just leave like this. Samantha didn't mean it like that. She was just... You know how she is. Sometimes she speaks without thinking. She speaks without thinking, I repeated. The words sounded hollow. Michael, she spent weeks planning that party. Every detail was perfect. Do you really believe what she said was an accident? He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. Okay, so maybe she crossed a line. But Mom, you're overreacting too. Leaving like this, making a scene. I made a scene? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped my throat. Your wife tore me to shreds in front of 50 people. She said I can't survive on my own, that I have nothing, that I'm a burden on you. And when I leave with dignity, I'm the one making a scene? Michael looked at the floor. He had no answer for that. Or maybe he did, but he didn't want to say it. Why didn't you defend me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I had wanted to sound strong, but my voice broke on the last word. Why did you just stand there while she destroyed me? I didn't know what to do, he said finally. His voice was small, like when he was a child and had broken something valuable. It happened so fast, and I didn't want to make things worse. You didn't want to make things worse, I whispered. I kept packing. I took the photos from the dresser, wrapped them in a soft blouse. Michael watched me, helpless. Mom, please stay. I'll talk to Samantha. She'll apologize. Everything will go back to normal. That's just it, Michael. I don't want everything to go back to normal. Because normal was me making myself invisible in my own life. Normal was your wife poisoning every day with little cruelties. Normal was you not seeing any of it, because it's easier not to see. I closed the suitcase. It wasn't much that I was taking. 3 years of my life reduced to one suitcase and a box with my books. Where are you going to go? Michael asked. There was something in his voice now, something that sounded like genuine concern, maybe even guilt. I have savings, I said. Not much, but I had them. I had been careful, even when I helped pay for his wedding, even when I contributed to the expenses of the house that was never really my house. I'll find a place. I'll be fine. Mom. He started, but I held up my hand. No, not tonight, Michael. Tonight I need to leave. I need to be alone and think. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find the boy I had raised in this man who had stayed silent while I was humiliated. I love you. I will always love you. But I can't stay here. I grabbed my suitcase and my purse. Michael didn't try to stop me physically, but he followed me down the hall, down the stairs, to the front door. The party was still going on in the yard, though quieter now. Everyone was probably gossiping about what had happened, creating their own versions of the story. It didn't matter. I walked out to the street and called an Uber on my phone. Michael stood in the doorway watching me go. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later. I knew that. But in that moment, I just felt a strange numbness, as if I were watching everything from outside my own body. The car arrived in 10 minutes. I gave the driver the address of a modest hotel I knew, not far from there. As we drove away, I saw the illuminated house in the rearview mirror. It looked beautiful from the outside, like a perfect postcard of success and happiness. No one passing by would know about the poison that lived between those walls. The hotel was simple, but clean. I paid for 1 week, using my credit card that had a low limit, but it was mine. The room was small, with a double bed and an old desk. Nothing compared to the house I had just left. But it was mine. Every inch of that space was mine. I sat on the bed and finally let out the breath I had been holding. And then my phone vibrated. It was a text from Michael. My heart leaped, hoping for maybe an apology, a promise that things would change. I opened the message. It was 3 long paragraphs. I started to read. "Mom, I need to be honest with you. Samantha and I have been talking for months about making some changes. With the baby we're planning on having, we're going to need that space you're using. And financially, we just can't keep carrying extra expenses. Samantha is right, that you need to learn to be more independent. I already spoke to the lawyer and had you removed from the will and the house deeds. It was something we should have done a while ago. I don't want you to think this is about tonight. It's just that we need to focus on our future as a couple. I hope you understand. You'll always be my mom, but I have my own family now." I read the message 3 times. Every word was a knife. The baby they were planning, the changes they had been discussing for months, removed me from the will, from the house deeds. It was all already planned. Tonight's humiliation hadn't been an impulse. It had been the final push to get me out of their lives permanently. And Michael had allowed it. No, more than that, Michael had actively participated. He had gone to a lawyer. He had signed papers. He had erased my name from his future. My son, the boy I had raised alone, who had been my reason for living for 25 years, had just eliminated me from his life with a text message. The phone fell from my hands onto the bed. I stared at the white hotel wall, not really seeing anything. And then, for the first time all night, I cried. I cried for the son I had lost. I cried for the years I had sacrificed. I cried for the woman who had been foolish enough to think that unconditional love was enough. I cried until there were no tears left, until my throat ached and my eyes were swollen. I cried until the sobs turned into anger, and that anger, cold and brilliant as a diamond, turned into something else. It turned into determination, into clarity, into power. If they wanted to see me fall, if they expected me to crumble, to beg them to let me come back, then they were in for a surprise. Because Eleanor Thompson had died tonight in that backyard, and the woman being born in this cheap hotel room was someone else entirely. She was someone who had forgotten just how strong she could be. I woke up the next day with swollen eyes and a dry throat, but with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in years. The sunlight streamed through the hotel window, illuminating the simple room that was now my temporary home. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was 65 years old, wrinkles around her eyes, graying hair that I had always been ashamed of. But there was something different in that gaze. There was fire. I washed my face, combed my hair, and put on clean clothes. Then I took out my old laptop, the one I'd bought years ago and barely used because Samantha always commented on how outdated it was. I powered it on and started making a list. Not an emotional list of complaints or regrets. A practical, strategic list of resources and possibilities. First, my savings. I had approximately $23,000 in my bank account. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't nothing, either. It was the result of years of being careful, of not spending on nonsense, of saving every penny I could. With that, I could rent a small apartment for several months while I figured out what to do. Second, my education. A bachelor's in business administration, completed over 30 years ago. Experience working at a consulting firm before Michael was born. I had left all that to raise my son, but the knowledge was still there, tucked away somewhere in my brain. Third, my contacts. Decades had passed, but maybe some people still remembered me. It was worth a try. I opened my email, that old account I almost never used, and there, among the spam and notifications, I found something that made me pause. An email from 2 months ago from Arthur Vance. Arthur had been my late husband's business partner, a man who had known our family since before Michael was born. After my husband died, Arthur had offered me a job at his company, but I had refused because Michael was so young. We kept in sporadic contact for years, until I moved in with Michael and Samantha and lost track of many people. The email read, "Eleanor, I hope you are well. I've been thinking of you lately. If you'd ever like to grab a coffee and catch up, I'd love to see you. I've always admired your mind for business. All the best, Arthur. I stared at that email for a long time. 2 months. It had arrived 2 months ago, and I had never seen it because I'd stopped checking my email regularly. Samantha always said I didn't need to be glued to technology, that I should enjoy my retirement. Retirement, as if I had chosen to retire, as if I didn't have decades of productive life still ahead of me. With slightly trembling hands, I replied to the email. Arthur, thank you for thinking of me. I would love to get that coffee. Are you free this week? I have a lot to tell you, Eleanor. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I searched my phone for another contact. Julia Hayes. We had been friends years ago, before I shut myself away in Michael and Samantha's house. Julia was a lawyer, specializing in family law. We had met in a support group for widows, both of us trying to rebuild our lives after losing our husbands. She had moved on, building a successful career. I had stayed stuck, focused solely on Michael. I sent her a text message. Julia, it's Eleanor. I know it's been a long time. Could we talk? I need legal advice, and also a friend. The reply came in less than 5 minutes. Eleanor, of course. Come to my office today if you can. I'll send the address. So good to hear from you. I changed into more formal clothes, a set of ivory-colored pants, and a blouse that made me look professional. I put on a little makeup, not to hide who I was, but to look presentable. I took a taxi to the address Julia had sent. Her office was in a modern building downtown. The waiting room was elegant but welcoming, with green plants and contemporary art on the walls. When Julia came out to greet me, I almost didn't recognize her. She had aged, as I had, but she wore her age with a confidence I had forgotten was possible. Short silver hair, a dark gray pantsuit, a wide smile. Eleanor, she said, hugging me. And in that hug, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Acceptance without judgment. In her private office, with hot coffee between us, I told her everything. The move with Michael and Samantha. The small humiliations. The party. The text from Michael about removing me from the will. Julia listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she sighed deeply. Eleanor, I am so sorry you went through this. But legally, there are a few things you should know. She explained that if I had contributed financially to the purchase of the house or to improvements, I might have some rights. That if Michael had promised to care for me in exchange for me selling my apartment, that could be considered. But she was also honest. Legal battles were long, expensive, and emotionally devastating. You could fight, she said, and you might even win something, but it would cost you years of your life and probably all of your peace of mind. I don't want to fight, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I don't want anything from them. What I want is to build something of my own, something so big that when they see me, they regret ever underestimating me. Julia smiled. It was a fierce, warrior's smile. I like that much better. In that case, let's talk strategy. We spent the next 2 hours discussing options. Julia told me about programs for entrepreneurs over 60, about community resources, about networking. She told me about women she knew who had reinvented their lives in their 60s and 70s. Age is an advantage if you know how to use it, she said. You have experience, maturity, resilience, and you have something many young people don't. Nothing to lose. The next day, Arthur replied to my email. We met at a small coffee shop near his office. When I walked in, he was already there, waiting. Arthur was 70, with completely white hair, but the same kind eyes I remembered. He stood up when he saw me and gave me a hug. Eleanor, how long has it been? We sat down and ordered coffee. He asked about Michael, and I felt the urge to lie, to say everything was fine. But I was tired of lying. I told him the truth. Not all of it, not the most painful details, but enough. He listened with a serious expression. That boy is a fool, he said finally. His father would be ashamed. The words hit me with an unexpected force. It was true. My husband had been a good, hard-working man who valued loyalty and respect. If he could see what Michael had done. But I don't want to talk about Michael, I said, straightening my back. I want to talk about me. Arthur, I need a job. I need a chance to prove I still have value. He looked at me intently. Eleanor, you have always had value. Your husband used to talk constantly about your vision for business. He said you were a better analyst than half our team. He grew thoughtful for a moment, sipping his coffee. I have a proposal. I'm starting a new division in my company. Specialized consulting for businesses that want to reach the senior market. It's a sector that's growing exponentially, but most companies don't know how to talk to that audience. I need someone who understands that demographic from the inside. Someone smart, with life experience, who can develop authentic strategies. My heart began to pound. A job. I'm offering you a partnership, he corrected. Not as an employee, as an independent consultant. You would develop your own methodology, your own programs. I would give you access to my network of clients and resources. We'd split the profits. It would be your own business, but with the backing of my infrastructure while you build it. I couldn't believe it. Yesterday I was crying in a hotel room. Today someone was offering me the chance to rebuild my professional life. Why? I asked. I needed to know. Why would you do this for me? Arthur smiled. Because I owe it to your husband. Because I believe in you. And because honestly, I think you are going to make this division extremely successful. This isn't charity, Eleanor. It's business. You have something I need. Authentic knowledge and a passion to prove your worth. He extended his hand. What do you say? Ready to get back in the game? I looked at his outstretched hand. I thought of Samantha saying I wouldn't last a year on my own. I thought of Michael erasing me from his life with a text. I thought of all those years of making myself small, invisible, insignificant, and then I shook Arthur's hand firmly. Ready, I said. And for the first time in years, I really was. The first 3 months were brutal, not because the work was hard, but because I had to relearn who I was without the identity of the selfless mother, without the role of the invisible mother-in-law. I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it had big windows that let in the sunlight and a balcony where I could have coffee in the mornings. It was mine. Every piece of furniture I bought, every plate, every towel, was my choice. For the first time in decades, no one was telling me my taste was outdated or inappropriate. I bought a used but solid desk, an ergonomic chair, and turned the corner of my living room into an office. This was where my new future would be born. Arthur kept his word. He connected me with my first client the second week, a chain of gyms that wanted to attract adults over 55 but didn't know how without sounding condescending. I sat down with their marketing directors, all in their 20s with prestigious degrees and zero understanding of their target audience. They looked at me with that mix of curiosity and skepticism reserved for older people in the corporate world. Eleanor, one of them started, a guy with thick glasses and a carefully scruffy beard. We appreciate you being here, but our brand is very modern. We don't want to alienate our younger audience. I smiled. It was the same smile I had used on Samantha that night in the yard. Calm, full of knowledge they didn't possess. Let me explain something to you, I said, opening my laptop where I had prepared a presentation. The over 55 market controls over 70% of the disposable income in this country. They have paid-off houses, substantial savings, and free time, but you're ignoring them because you assume they aren't cool. You know what isn't cool? Leaving money on the table because of generational bias. I showed them statistics, case studies, financial projections. I spoke for 45 minutes about demographics, consumer behavior, and strategies for inclusion without condescension. When I finished, the guy with the glasses was no longer looking at me with skepticism. He was looking at me like he had just struck gold. When can you start? He asked. I already have, I replied. I walked out of that meeting with a $25,000 contract to develop their entire strategy. With that first success, other clients started to come. A tech company that wanted to simplify its products for older users. A travel agency specializing in senior tourism. A pharmaceutical company that needed clearer communication. Every project taught me something new and gave me back a piece of the woman I had been before I got lost in motherhood. It wasn't that I regretted raising Michael, but I regretted disappearing in the process. I worked 12-hour days, not because I had to, but because I loved it. Every presentation, Every analysis, every strategy was a declaration. I am still here. I still matter. I can still build things. Julia became my confidant and unofficial advisor. We met every 2 weeks for dinner, and she helped me navigate the legal world of contracts and business. You need to formalize this, she told me one night over cheap pasta and wine. Create an LLC. Protect your assets. This isn't a hobby anymore, Eleanor. This is a real business. She was right. With her help, I established my own company, Silver Strategies Consulting. The name was deliberate. Silver for the gray hair, for the wisdom that comes with years. I wasn't hiding from my age. I was branding it. I designed a simple but elegant logo. I created a basic website. And I started building a presence on social media, something I'd never done because Samantha always said older people looked ridiculous on Instagram. But it turned out there was a huge market of women my age who were sick of being invisible. I started posting about reinvention after 60, about starting businesses in your senior years, about not letting others define your worth. My first posts got 5 or 10 likes, then 50, then hundreds. Women would write me private messages, sharing their own stories of humiliation, of being dismissed, of waking up one day and realizing they had disappeared. And I answered every single one. It's not too late. It is never too late. I am 65, and I am just getting started. My words resonated because they were true. I wasn't selling a fantasy. I was living proof. 6 months in, my business was generating more money than I had earned in my entire previous life. I wasn't a millionaire, but I was comfortable. More than comfortable. I was able to move into a better apartment, in a building with security and a gym. I bought new clothes, not because the old ones were bad, but because I wanted to. Brightly colored dresses that Samantha would have said were inappropriate for my age. Elegant coats that made me feel powerful when I walked down the street. I cut my hair in a modern style that framed my face. I wasn't trying to look younger. I was trying to look like me. Strong, capable, present. People began to notice me in different ways. In business meetings, they no longer treated me like a lost grandmother. They treated me like an expert. Arthur was thrilled. Eleanor, we need to expand this. You're generating more business than you can handle alone. He was right. Consulting requests were coming in faster than I could process them, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired help. First, a virtual assistant, a 58-year-old woman who had been laid off from her corporate job and needed a fresh start. Then a 62-year-old graphic designer who had lost her husband and was looking for purpose. I built a team of women the world had discarded, and together we proved that world wrong. We proudly called ourselves the Silver Circle. And our work was exceptional. The media started to notice. First, it was a small article in a local paper about senior entrepreneurs. Then an interview in a business magazine. Then I was invited onto a popular podcast about professional reinvention. Every appearance brought more clients, more recognition, more validation that what I was building mattered. On one of those podcasts, the interviewer asked what had inspired me to start. I could have given a safe answer about always wanting to be an entrepreneur, but I decided to be honest. I was inspired by humiliation, I said. I was inspired by someone telling me I was worthless without them. I was inspired by discovering I had been wrong about myself for years. The episode went viral. Thousands of people shared it. The comments were filled with women saying, "Me too," and "This is me, and I needed to hear this." 8 months after I walked out of Michael's house, my company had billed over $200,000. I was personally earning more in a month than I had in a year when I worked before Michael was born. But the best part wasn't the money. It was the sense of purpose. It was waking up every day knowing that what I did mattered, that I was helping other people, that I was building something no one could take away from me. I opened a new savings account and started filling it aggressively. Not because I was afraid of being left with nothing again, but because I wanted options. I wanted to be able to say no. I wanted the power to choose. During all this time, Michael tried to contact me several times. Text messages that I read but didn't answer. "Mom, how are you? Mom, we need to talk. Samantha wants to apologize." Each message was a test of my resolve. Part of me, that part that had been a mother for so many years, wanted to answer, wanted to forgive and forget. But a newer, stronger part knew that responding would be a step backward, not out of anger, but out of peace. I decided that when I was ready to talk to Michael, it would be on my terms. When I was so undeniably successful that he couldn't help but see what he had lost. When my absence had taught the lesson my presence never could. I blocked his number temporarily. Not forever, but for now. I needed this time for myself, without the distraction of his guilt or his attempts to fix what he had broken. And I kept building. Every day was another brick in the building of my new life. Some days were hard. Some days I sat on my balcony and cried for the son I had lost, for the years I couldn't get back. But those days became less frequent. And in their place, something more solid grew. Certainty. The certainty that I had done the right thing, that I deserved more than I had accepted, that my story hadn't ended that night in the garden. It was just beginning. It was Julia who showed me the video first. We were having lunch at a restaurant near her office when she pulled out her phone with a strange expression. "Eleanor, you need to see this. It's going viral." She passed me the phone, and there it was, the video from that night in the yard. Someone had uploaded it to social media, but not in the way Samantha had planned. The title read, "Cruel Daughter-in-Law Humiliates Mother. In-Law at Family Party. Watch what happens next." It had over 2 million views. My stomach clenched as I watched it. There was Samantha in her emerald green dress, saying all those horrible things about me. The camera perfectly captured her cruel smile, the way she looked for validation from her friends. And then it captured me, stepping out of the shadows, my voice calm but firm. "Why wait a year? I'm leaving now." The comments were devastating for Samantha. What a venomous woman. The mother-in-law has more class in her little finger than this girl has in her whole body. "Updates, please. I need to know the grandma is okay." Thousands and thousands of comments defending me, attacking Samantha, sharing their own stories of family abuse. The video had clearly struck a nerve. It wasn't just about me. It was about all the older women who had been dismissed, belittled, made invisible, and people were furious. "I didn't know anyone had uploaded it," I said, handing the phone back to Julia with trembling hands. She nodded. It was one of the guests. Apparently, she felt so uncomfortable with what Samantha did that she decided to expose her. And it worked. In the following days, the video reached more platforms: TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, influencers shared it with their own commentary. Journalists began writing articles about ageism and emotional family abuse, using my story as an example. And then they started to find more. Former housekeepers who had worked for Samantha and Michael began to speak out. One of them, a woman named Maria, gave an interview to a popular blog. She talked about how Samantha treated her, yelling at her for minimal mistakes, withholding pay, making her work overtime without compensation. And the way she treated her husband's mom was worse, Maria said in the interview. "Mrs. Thompson was so kind, she always treated us with respect. But Samantha humiliated her constantly. She forbade her from entering certain parts of the house. She'd serve her leftovers while they ate fresh food. It was abuse." More women came forward with similar stories. A nanny Samantha had fired without notice. A florist Samantha had publicly accused of ruining an event when the mistake had been Samantha's. A pattern was emerging. Samantha was cruel to anyone she perceived as inferior or powerless to fight back. The brands Samantha worked with as an influencer began to distance themselves. She had a small YouTube channel about luxury lifestyles and a few minor brand deals. One by one, those contracts were canceled. The companies issued statements saying their values did not align with abusive behavior. Samantha's YouTube channel lost thousands of subscribers in days. Her Instagram posts, which used to get thousands of likes, were now flooded with hundreds of negative comments. Abuser. Fake. Karma. I watched all of this from a distance, with complicated feelings. Part of me felt a dark satisfaction watching her world crumble. It was the justice I hadn't sought, but that the universe was delivering anyway. But another part of me, the part that was still a mother, worried about Michael. Because if Samantha was falling, he would fall with her. And then I got a text from an unknown number. It was Chris, Michael's best friend from college. Mrs. Thompson, I need to talk to you. It's about Michael, please. I hesitated, but finally agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop. Chris arrived, looking tired, nervous. He sat across from me and sighed deeply. Thanks for coming. I know the family has treated you terribly. What's wrong with Michael? I asked, getting straight to the point. Chris stared at his coffee. He's a wreck. The video, the public exposure, it's all affecting his job. His clients are questioning him. But that's not the worst part. He paused. He found out Samantha has been lying to him about a lot of things. Finances, mainly. She spent over $60,000 in the last 6 months on things she hid: clothes, beauty treatments, even a sports car she bought in her sister's name but that she drives. Michael thought they were saving for the baby they were supposedly trying to have. But it turns out Samantha never wanted kids. It was just another lie to keep him under control. The cold anger I had felt that night returned. She hadn't just taken my son from me. She had been manipulating him all this time. There's more, Chris continued. Michael found texts between Samantha and her friends. Text from over a year ago where she was making fun of him. She said he was boring but useful because he had a good income and a house, that she was just with him until she found something better. It was all planned, Mrs. Thompson. From the beginning, she was just using him. I closed my eyes. My poor, foolish son. He had chosen that woman over his mother, and now he was discovering she had never even loved him. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Chris looked at me directly. Because he wants to talk to you, but he's too ashamed. Because he needs his mother, even if he doesn't know how to ask. And because you deserve to know that he finally understands what he lost. I didn't answer right away. I drank my coffee, processing the information. Michael had made choices. He had chosen to believe Samantha. He had allowed my humiliation. He had erased me from his life with a text. The consequences of those choices were his to bear. Tell Michael, I said finally, that when he's ready to talk, I'll be ready to listen. But not because I need him to, because he might need to. Chris nodded, understanding. That's fair. More than fair. He got up to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, all his real friends thought what they did to you was horrible, and we're all proud to see what you've built. Your story has inspired a lot of people. After he left, I stayed in the coffee shop, thinking. The viral video, Samantha's downfall, I hadn't planned any of it. I hadn't sought public revenge. I had chosen the harder path, to build something so solid that my absence would speak for itself. And now, the world was doing the rest. But I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. I felt something more complex. I felt grief for the lost time. I felt sadness for my son, who had learned such painful lessons. But I also felt peace. Peace because I knew that no matter what happened with Michael, I would be okay. I no longer needed his validation to know my worth. That night, as I was working on a proposal for a new client, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mom, it was Michael. His voice sounded broken, small, like when he was a child and had a nightmare. I said nothing, waiting. Mom, I'm sorry. I am so sorry for everything. You were right about Samantha. You were right about everything. I was an idiot. I was a terrible son, and I understand if you never forgive me, but I needed you to know. I'm sorry. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but my voice came out firm. Michael, I appreciate your apology, but I can't have this conversation right now. I need time. I've built a new life, and I need to protect my peace. When I'm ready, I will let you know. I understand, he said, his voice cracking. I want you to know I'm proud of you. I saw your company. I read about your success. You're amazing, Mom. You always were, and I was too blind to see it. Goodbye, Michael, I said softly. I hung up before he could answer. I sat in my home office, in the apartment I had built with my own money, surrounded by the evidence of my success. And I cried. I cried for what had been. I cried for what could have been, but I also smiled, because I had survived. Not just survived, I had flourished, and that no one could take away from me. 3 weeks after Michael's call, I received an invitation that would change everything. The city's Chamber of Commerce was organizing its annual Entrepreneurship Summit, a prestigious event where business leaders shared their success stories, and they had selected me as one of the keynote speakers. The topic of my talk: Reinvention after 60. It's never too late to start. When I read the invitation, my hands trembled. Speaking in front of 300 people in a corporate auditorium, being on a stage under bright lights, sharing my story with strangers who would judge me, analyze me, measure me. The old Eleanor would have declined immediately. She would have said she wasn't qualified, that someone else deserved the honor. But I wasn't the old Eleanor anymore. I accepted the invitation. I spent 2 weeks preparing my presentation. Not just the business technicalities, but the emotional story behind it. Julia helped me rehearse, sitting in my living room as I practiced over and over. "You need to mention the humiliation," she told me during one rehearsal. "It's the most powerful part. It's what makes your story real." I had been avoiding that detail, not wanting to seem victimized or bitter. But she was right. The humiliation was the catalyst. Without it, there would have been no transformation. "You don't have to name names," Julia continued. "But people need to understand where you came from to appreciate how far you've come." So I rewrote entire sections, adding the raw truth of that yard, of that text message, of that night in the cheap hotel, crying myself to sleep. The day of the event arrived, overcast and cool. I put on a wine-colored pantsuit I had bought specifically for the occasion, elegant but powerful. I did my makeup carefully, not to hide my age but to highlight it. I wanted every wrinkle to be seen. They were maps of survival, battle scars. I arrived at the convention center an hour early. The auditorium was enormous, with rows and rows of seats rising toward the ceiling. The stage had a giant screen and professional lighting. My stomach churned with nerves, but I took a deep breath. I had survived worse than a stage. Arthur arrived to support me, along with my small team from the Silver Circle. "You're going to be incredible," my assistant said, squeezing my hand. People began to fill the auditorium. Executives in expensive suits, young entrepreneurs with laptops, students taking notes. I was scheduled to speak after lunch, the prime spot when people are alert but relaxed. As I waited backstage, I checked my phone nervously. And then I saw it. A text from Chris. "Mrs. Thompson, Michael is here. In the auditorium, row 12. Just wanted you to know." Samantha tried to come with him, but he told her no. They're officially separated. Good luck. My heart stopped. Michael was here. My son had come to watch me speak. I didn't know whether to feel happy or terrified. I decided not to think about it. I had a job to do. The host called me to the stage. The applause was polite, professional. I walked to the podium, back straight, head high. The lights were blinding, making it impossible to see individual faces in the audience. Better that way. I took a deep breath and began. 11 months ago, I was 65 years old, and I had nothing. No job, no income of my own, no sense of identity outside of being someone's mother. I was living in my son's house as an unwanted guest, making myself smaller every day, believing that was all I deserved. The auditorium went completely silent. And then, at a family party, someone told me that I wouldn't last a year living on my own, that I was nothing without that family. And something inside of me broke. Or maybe it fixed itself. It's hard to tell. I told the story. Not with self-pity, but with brutal honesty. The humiliation, the decision to leave, the devastating text from Michael. I heard gasps in the audience, murmurs of sympathy. But I didn't stop there. I told them about the hotel, about calling Arthur, about building Silver Strategies Consulting from scratch. I shared real numbers. My first $25,000, then $50,000, then $100,000. I showed before and after photos. Me in that hotel room with a single suitcase. Me now, in my modern office with my team. Age makes us invisible in this society, I said, my voice growing stronger, especially women. We are told our value ends when we stop being young, when we stop being conventionally attractive, when we stop being useful to others. But that is a lie. I am 66 years old. I have wrinkles. I have gray hair. I have knees that ache when it rains. And I also have a company that generates over $300,000 annually. I have clients who respect me. I have a team that trusts me. I have a life that I built with these hands that someone said were not capable of holding anything. The audience erupted in applause. Not the polite applause from the beginning. Real, loud applause, with people getting to their feet. I saw movement in row 12. Someone standing up. And though the lights made it hard to see clearly, I knew it was Michael. He was on his feet, clapping, and in the distance I could see he was crying. My voice broke slightly, but I continued. So for anyone here who thinks it's too late, for anyone who has been dismissed, underestimated, made invisible, it is not. You are not too old, too tired, too late. You are exactly what the world needs. Experience, resilience, wisdom. Use it. When I finished, the ovation was deafening. People of all ages on their feet, applauding. I saw tears on many faces. The host had to wait almost 2 minutes before the noise died down enough to speak. Eleanor, that was extraordinary. Do you have time for a few questions from the audience? I nodded. Hands shot up immediately. A young woman asked about specific marketing strategies. An older man asked about overcoming fear. And then someone in row 12 raised their hand. The host passed him a microphone. Michael's voice, amplified throughout the auditorium, asked, "Is there room for forgiveness in your story of reinvention? Or are some wounds just too deep?" The auditorium fell silent. It wasn't the kind of business question they were expecting. It was personal, raw, obviously loaded with meaning. I looked toward where Michael stood, my eyes finally adjusting to the lights. I could see him clearly now. My son, thinner than before, with dark circles under his eyes, but looking at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine respect. "That's a complicated question," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "I believe forgiveness isn't something you owe to other people. It's something you give yourself so you can move on. I have forgiven the people who hurt me not because they deserve it, but because carrying that anger was hurting me." I paused. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean letting the same people hurt you in the same way again. It means setting boundaries, protecting your peace, and rebuilding trust slowly, if it's rebuilt at all. Michael lowered the microphone, nodding. I could see he understood. He understood that the door wasn't closed forever, but it wasn't wide open either. I answered a few more questions before the event continued. When I walked off the stage, I was surrounded by people wanting to talk to me, to exchange business cards, to share their own stories. But my eyes kept searching the crowd for Michael. Finally, I saw him, waiting at the edge of the group, not forcing his way in, just waiting patiently. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached. We looked at each other for a long moment without saying anything. And then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so proud of you, Mom, and so ashamed of myself." "I know," I said simply. "Michael, you need to understand that I can't go back to being who I was. That woman died that night in your yard. This version of me has boundaries. She has expectations. She has self-worth that isn't dependent on being your mother." "I understand," he said quickly. "And I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened. I'm just asking for a chance to get to know this new version of you, to rebuild something, even if it's different." I looked at him. "My son, my greatest love and my greatest sorrow. We can try," I said finally, slowly, "coffee once a month, to start. No promises, no expectations. Just two people learning to know each other again." Tears rolled freely down his face now. "Thank you, Mom. That's more than I deserve." "Yes," I agreed softly. "It is. Don't waste it." A year after that night in the garden, my life was unrecognizable. Silver Strategies Consulting had grown beyond my wildest dreams. It was no longer just me and a small team. I now had real offices in a corporate building downtown, with 12 full-time employees, all women over 50 who had been discarded by the traditional corporate world. We had expanded into 3 countries, Mexico, Colombia, and Spain. Contracts were coming in faster than we could process them. Fortune 500 companies wanted my expertise. Universities invited me to give lectures. My story had been featured in international business magazines, always with the same angle. the woman who turned humiliation into an empire. Money was no longer a concern. I had surpassed $1 million in annual revenue. I bought a beautiful apartment overlooking the city, the kind of place I used to look at in magazines, thinking it would never be for someone like me. I had art on the walls, elegant furniture I had chosen personally, a balcony where I drank coffee every morning watching the sunrise. But the best part wasn't the material things. It was the sense of solidity, of knowing that no one could take away what I had built, because I had built it myself with my intelligence, my hard work, my refusal to disappear. Every morning I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I liked, a strong woman, a woman who had survived and flourished. Michael and I had been seeing each other once a month, just as I'd promised. Awkward coffees at first, with long silences and careful conversations. But slowly, very slowly, something was growing. Not the mother-son relationship we had before. That had died and wasn't coming back. This was something new, something more honest. He told me about his divorce from Samantha, which had been brutal and public. She had fought for the house, for money she hadn't earned, using every manipulative tactic in her arsenal. But in the end, the truth had won. Michael kept the house, but he decided to sell it. "I can't live there," he told me at one of our coffees. "Every room has memories of how I treated you, of how I let her treat you." I didn't console him. That was his burden to carry, his lesson to learn. He told me how Samantha had tried to ruin him after the divorce, posting lies on social media, contacting his clients with fabricated stories. But the world already knew who she really was. The viral video had marked her permanently. Now she was working retail at a department store, an honest job, but a far cry from the luxury life she had planned. "I sometimes feel sorry for her," I admitted at one of our meetings. He looked at me, surprised. "How can you? After everything she did to you?" "Because she built her entire life on lies and manipulation. And when that building collapsed, she had nothing real underneath. I did. I had real skills, real experience, real strength. She never developed anything of her own. That's a sad way to live." Michael had been going to therapy, something he told me shyly, as if expecting me to mock him, but I encouraged him. "Good. We all need help processing our decisions. To understand why we do the things we do." He told me his therapist had helped him see patterns, how he had chosen Samantha because she was dominant and he wanted someone else to make decisions, how he had sacrificed his relationship with me because it was easier than confronting his wife. "I was a coward," he said at one of our last coffees. "Not just with you. In my whole life. I let other people decide for me, and then I was surprised when things went wrong." "Awareness is the first step," I told him, "but it only matters if you use it to change." He nodded, taking my words seriously in a way he never had before. And then the invitation arrived. The biggest business event of the year, a gala recognizing the most outstanding entrepreneurs of the year, and I was nominated. Not just nominated, I was told I was the favorite to win in my category. Business reinvention. The gala would be at the most exclusive hotel in the city. 500 guests. Media coverage. The kind of event where careers are changed. I was given 3 guest tickets. I invited Arthur, of course. Without him, none of this would have been possible. I invited Julia, my constant rock through this whole journey. And after thinking about it for a long time, I offered the 3rd ticket to Michael. "You don't have to go," I told him. "I understand if it would be uncomfortable." He looked at me with shining eyes. "Mom, I wouldn't miss this for the world." The night of the gala was bright and cold. I wore a long, champagne-colored gown that made me feel like royalty. I had let my hair grow out a bit, all silver gray now, no dye, and had it styled in an elegant updo. Simple but expensive jewelry I had bought for myself as a symbol of my success. When I arrived at the hotel with my team, the camera flashes surprised me. Reporters wanted interviews. "Mrs. Thompson, how does it feel to be nominated? What advice do you have for women who want to reinvent themselves? Your story has inspired millions. What's next for you?" I answered every question with grace, feeling the confidence flow through my veins. This was my night. I had earned it. The ballroom was spectacular. round tables with white linens and enormous floral centerpieces, an orchestra playing soft music, waiters circulating with champagne and appetizers. I sat at my table with Arthur, Julia, Michael, and some of my employees. They were all beaming, proud. During dinner, Michael leaned toward me. "Mom, there's something you need to know." His voice sounded nervous. My heart tightened. "Samantha is here. She managed to get an invitation somehow. She's at a table in the back. I just thought you should know before you saw her." I looked in the direction he indicated, and there she was. Samantha, in a black dress that had seen better days, sitting alone at a nearly empty table, scanning the room with a bitter expression. Our eyes met for a second. She looked small, diminished, as if all the venom she had carried inside had finally consumed her. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not triumph, just indifference. She no longer had any power over me. She was irrelevant to my story. I turned my back to her and continued my conversation with my table. Then it was time for the awards. Several categories were announced first: tech innovation, social entrepreneurship. Each winner went up to the stage to enthusiastic applause. And then my category arrived. The Business Reinvention Award recognizes an entrepreneur who has overcome significant adversity to build a successful business. This year, the nominees are. They read 3 names, including mine. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone could hear it. And the winner is Eleanor Thompson, founder of Silver Strategies Consulting. The room exploded in applause. My table leaped to their feet, cheering. Michael had tears rolling down his face. Arthur hugged me tightly. "You did it," he whispered. "I always knew you would." I walked to the stage, my legs trembling, but my head high. The award was a beautiful crystal plaque, heavy in my hands. I stood at the microphone, looking out at 500 people, on their feet, applauding. I scanned the crowd for Samantha. She was sitting, alone at her table, staring at me with an expression I can only describe as absolute defeat. And in that moment, I understood something profound. I hadn't won because she lost. I had won because I chose to build instead of destroy. Because when she tried to make me small, I chose to become enormous. Not for revenge, but for survival. Not to prove anything to her, but to prove everything to myself. "Thank you," I began, my voice firm and clear. "A year ago, someone told me that I had nothing. And that person was right. I had nothing, except a decision to make, to disappear or to flourish. I chose to flourish, and in the process I discovered that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. This award isn't just mine. It's for every woman who has been dismissed, underestimated, made invisible. It's for every person who has picked themselves up off the floor after being knocked down. It's for everyone who dares to start over when the world says it's too late. Thank you." The applause was deafening. I walked off the stage with my award, feeling its weight, not just the crystal, but what it represented. Validation, recognition, proof that I mattered. As I returned to my table, I passed by Samantha's. She was looking at me, her eyes filled with something that might have been regret, or maybe just envy. I paused for a second, and then I kept walking. Not with cruelty, simply with indifference. She was no longer part of my story. That night, after the gala ended, Michael walked me to the car. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I am so proud of you. And so sorry. I wish I could turn back time." "I wouldn't," I said honestly. "If I could turn back time, I would still be that small, invisible woman settling for crumbs. That night in your yard, when Samantha humiliated me. It was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. It set me free. It forced me to see myself, and it gave me the anger I needed to transform." I looked at him, my son, this imperfect man I loved in spite of everything. "So, thank you. Tell Samantha," I said, "thank you. Because without her cruelty, I never would have discovered my strength." He nodded, understanding. We hugged, a real hug, with forgiveness and hope woven in. That day, she thought she was destroying me, but it was the day I began, and this is only the beginning.